And we welcome back Duff Conacher, one of the founders of Democracy Watch and now its coordinator, who's leaving the job after 18 years there.
Yes.
That's a heck of a good run.
Yes, yeah.
Let us not presume that everybody who's watching this program right now knows what you've been up to. So why don't we start with that?
Sure.
What have you been doing for the last 18 years?
Well, Democracy Watch has been trying to make Canada the world's leading democracy. And also that includes working on corporate responsibility, not just good government issues. And essentially we're trying to ensure that everyone's effectively required to act honestly, ethically, openly, representatively, and prevent waste. Those are the 5 big ways that both government and big business need to act in order to be responsible in addressing people's concerns.
Let's look at government for the moment. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning we're Nigeria, 10 meaning
yes.
we're Nirvana, where's the government of Canada?
Well, we're very good on paper. We're not so good at implementation and enforcement. We have lots of technical loopholes and enforcement problems. It makes us about an 8 out of 10. And so we have room for improvement, definitely.
8 out of 10 is not bad, though. My hunch is if you ask the average person on the street, they'd say 3 or 4.
Yes, and essentially Democracy Watch's mandate and goal has been, let's make us a real model. We're definitely respected worldwide. And so let's be out there so when our representatives are traveling elsewhere and saying this is what you should do, they're really saying the best way. And we don't have the best way. We have loopholes in rules, we have weak enforcement and weak penalties in a bunch of areas of both good government and corporate responsibility. Still, after 18 years, we've won about half the changes we need to win as Democracy Watch, more than 110 changes to federal and provincial laws. But there's lots of technical loopholes that have been left open and the enforcement and penalties are still very weak.
Who did what you've been doing before you were in business?
No one really, in terms of taking on the broad range of democratic reform issues. Sometimes the opposition parties, in response usually to a crisis or scandal. Various groups, a little bit on various issues, but that's really why we started. I worked in Washington as an intern with Ralph Nader, and I wasn't working on
Nader's Raiders?
I was, temporarily as an intern, and I wasn't working on those issues. I was actually working on safe drinking water. But those were the issues that really caught my eye and interest, and was the thing that I found myself reading at 2 a.m. and thinking, this is really what I want to do. So when I came back and went through law school, I was looking for a group to work for, and there wasn't one. And through lots of luck, was able to come up with the funding, co-authored a book with Ralph Nader, and that helped start it up.
That was my next question. How many staff you got there?
We've had up to 3, but it's generally been just myself as full-time.
So you don't need to do a ton of fundraising to keep this thing going then? You just need a lot of energy?
Lots of energy.
But who does fund you anyway?
We have a mix of individuals from across the country. We have also formed coalitions on our various issues, 4 of them that involve 140 groups, and some of the larger groups that can afford it donate. And then we have also partner projects and programs with a charitable organization called Democracy Education Network. And so we tap into some foundation funding through that as well.
Now, just to go back to one of the first things you said, which is we ought to be a 10 out of 10 as a democracy, not just an 8 out of 10, even if 8's not bad.
Yes.
This is democracy defined by you, I guess, right?
No, not really, actually. We're looking at international standards, conventions that Canada has signed, like the UN Convention Against Corruption. Lots of people measuring it out there. The World Bank, the IMF, various organizations, the UN itself does these measurements. Democracy Watch has done the most comprehensive study of Canada in partnership with a group in Washington called Global Integrity. Involves measuring Canadian democracy across more than 300 indicators. And so these are international standards and expected, and we're just essentially taking them and applying them and looking at the Canadian laws and enforcement systems and saying, do we match what the international or other standards are, and do we match what Canadians want? Everything we're advocating, a large majority of Canadians actually want from government.
How do you know that?
Well, the polls have been consistent over the past couple of decades, showing that people want honest, ethical, open government. They want it representative. They want it to use their taxpayer dollars effectively. And so they may not, I'm not saying the specific solution we're pushing for, but they definitely want the loopholes addressed. And the loopholes are well identified, and people realize people are getting away with things.
Okay, let's talk solutions then. What is the, point to one issue that you thought was kind of an egregious breach of democratic protocol, but you got in there, did your thing, and won a victory?
Well, we used to have unlimited donations allowed by anybody, including corporations, unions, and other organizations.
To political parties?
Yes.
And you argued against
that? And to candidates. We're against that because if you believe in the fundamental key democratic principle, and we're always working from democratic principles, of one person, one vote, then you wouldn't allow one person to use money as a means of having more influence than another person.
And John Conacher eventually passed a law that prohibited that.
He limited donations to too high level, $5,000 per person.
Seems like it lower.
To a party. Well, it was lowered by the Harper Conservatives with the Accountability Act down to
now $1,100 or something now?
$1,100, but it's actually $1,100 to the party and another $1,100 to the riding association each year. And so that's actually $2,200, and in election you can donate another $1,100, so it's $3,300. An average Canadian cannot come up with $3,300, and so it's still actually too high. It's
you
not
think
at
the
a
rich are
level
still having a disproportionate influence?
Yes, lowering it would make it mean that the parties would have to reach out to more people, and that's healthy in a democracy, and address their concerns in order to stay financially prosperous and prosper overall. They'd have more members and more people involved, so that would all be good.
Don't take this question the wrong way, but you know, we talked in the last segment, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Auditor General of Canada. I mean, these are people who have an official job given to them by statute through Parliament to do, you know, I don't want to say the same thing you're doing, but they have an oversight, a gadfly role, if you like. You really don't. You don't have any official role, right? You're a self-proclaimed
citizen watchdog.
Exactly.
Yes.
Do you feel you are on a par with them in terms of what you're trying to do?
Well, actually, we're trying to improve what they're able to do in terms of their powers and the loopholes they have, and they lack accountability as well. For example, you can't challenge the ethics commissioner in court, even if her ruling is completely 100% factually incorrect or ignores established law. You can't challenge her in court. So some of these accountability watchdogs need accountability as well, because they're really czars. And
who watches the watchdog?
Exactly, and they shouldn't be. So we're just trying to fill in the loopholes and identify them. And a lot of them have been made independent based on our campaigns. They used to be lapdogs of cabinet. So we're always trying to look, what are the loopholes in the rules? Where are the weak enforcement in terms of lack of independence or powers? And what are the penalties? And does it all add up to a system that effectively would encourage people to act in good government ways as opposed to bad government ways?
Well, to that end, who watches the watchdog? Who watches you?
Well, people join us if they agree with our mandate and fund us. We don't take government funding. We don't take funding from corporations that we're watching over either. So we survive based on people wanting us to survive. And the media is there on a check as well. I can issue a news release, but it only gets covered if the media says this has a valid point. So like any citizen watchdog group, you're really there and surviving and keeping in the public eye if others say that what you're saying has merit.
But you were candid enough to tell us a few minutes ago that basically you're it, right? You may have a few extra staffers along the way from time to time, but you're Democracy Watch, one person.
Yes.
How influential can you be, you know, when you're going up against multi-million-dollar partisan organizations, you know, parliamentary budget officer who's got not as big a budget as he wants, maybe a few $1 million he'd like to have double or triple that. And the Auditor General's got millions in her budget, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. Well, you work smart. Very strategically and tactically, and that's how we've won more than 110 changes to federal law. But again, there's another 100 loopholes to go at every level of government in Canada, and there's 15 loopholes in the corporate responsibility area that need to be closed. I mean, essentially, when you look at the situation, if you park illegally on a city street in most of the major cities in Canada, there will be an inspection, an audit of what you're doing. The rules are very clear, you know, certain limitations. And you'll likely get caught, a high chance of getting caught, and you'll pay a penalty. When you look at our good government systems, they're more like speeding on a remote road. There's usually no inspection. If there is, you probably might get let off on a technicality. And then in terms of penalty, very, very weak penalties. So kind of have this perverse system where the most important good government rules in governments across Canada at every level are enforced about as much as speeding in a car is on a remote road.
Now, I remember when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister back in 2006, when he beat Paul Martin in that election, one of the 5 principles that he ran on was a newer, tougher Accountability Act.
Yes.
He did that. He put that through. Did it have everything in there that you, I guess, would like to have seen?
No. He made 60 promises, and the act that he introduced only included 30 of the promised changes. And they've only implemented 29, and the act actually took 7 steps backwards, including the removal of the rule for cabinet and senior officials that they have to be honest, and also weakened other ethics rules and access to information rules. So very fundamentally, I think shattered the faith of some of his own core voters by not fulfilling that Accountability Act promise, by misleading voters, promising 60 changes and only implementing about a third of them.
Tell me one thing he promised to do that he didn't do that you think he should have done.
One of the major, most important ones was the Public Appointments Commission, to have a merit-based commission independent of the cabinet that would screen candidates, publicize these more than 3,000 positions.
But you know why he pulled the plug on that?
Sure, he wanted to be able to appoint people that he wanted.
Well, that's one way of saying it. He said that the opposition turned it into a circus and embarrassed his potential candidates, and that's why he wasn't going to put anybody through that.
In a minority parliament, you don't get to choose who you appoint to a Public Appointments Commission, especially someone who has formerly raised money for you and was properly labeled as someone who probably wouldn't really work as a real watchdog on this very key area. So that was a major change, and the government's gone on to appoint now more than 1,500 people. And there's really lots of cases, no criteria, professional or otherwise, that they have to follow. They can just choose whomever they want. That's very dangerous in a democracy, to give the cabinet, a few people, and the prime minister really overall that kind of power.
Okay, in our last few minutes here, let me ask you a bit about you. You've decided to move on. Do you know what you're going to do now?
Yes, actually, I'm helping a person start up a foundation, a charitable foundation that's going to do research and education in similar areas. It's not fully public yet, but that's at least something I'm going to work on for a while.
So you had enough of watching over democracy?
No, I'll stay on the board and help out and probably stay as a spokesperson on one issue.
Do you think they'll be able to replace you?
That's the process we're going through, actually, starting this week. And yeah, I think we'll be able to hire someone who can take on the mantle. And
I mean, you've lived this. You have really lived this thing for almost 20 years now. They're going to find anybody else out there who's prepared to basically turn over their whole life to watching those folks up there?
Maybe not, but you know, someone who can carry on. We've all done all the research. The mandate's set out. The 100 loopholes are identified, and if they are enthusiastic and stay active on it, will stay in the public eye as the politicians continue practicing politics as usual. And hopefully we'll get some of these key things cleaned up, like honesty in politics. I mean, we know that's a real #1 voter concern. We see it you're going to see it again probably tomorrow night in the debates as voters pose the questions, and always there's this question about a guarantee that they'll keep promises. It's one of the key loopholes we need closed, and I think over the next decade, 18 years, another 18 years, hopefully we'll close some of the major of the 100 remaining loopholes.
Okay, 1 minute to go. I got 2 more questions I've always wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Who are you voting for in this election?
Actually, I refrain from voting because federally, you don't have the right to refuse your ballot. You do in Ontario. It's never promoted by Elections Ontario. It really should be, because it would give people another option to go to the ballot box and refuse as opposed to spoil your ballot. And we should have it federally as well. It should have been implemented long ago. And we're strictly nonpartisan, and so I maintain my strictly nonpartisan stance even in voting. Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you is, are you one of those famous Conachers?
Yes, I am, actually. That's how I lucked into going and working with Ralph Nader. My uncle, Brian Conacher, was on the last Leaf team to win in '67, so he's a rare breed now. He was talking to his friend Ken Dryden at a party, knowing I was looking around now back in '86 for some issues work to do. And Ken Dryden had actually worked for Nader while he was going to law school and playing for the Canadians way back when in the '70s, and he suggested the idea, and here I am now 25 years later.
So you are a descendant of Lionel Conacher?
Yes, grandfather.
The original great.
Indeed.
Isn't that fantastic? I never knew that about you. That's great. Well, congratulations on all your work, and good luck with what comes next with your next foundation work.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Duff Conacher, one of the founders and coordinator, for a little more time anyway, of Democracy Watch. Thanks, Duff.